we'll lose them and forget them.
For sure.
Let's try and contain this just to Reddit, but we're super excited. And so if you can, join us.
March 7th, 2015.
March 7th, 2015, sorry. Just in case somebody, 5 years from now is listening to this episode. Not 2017. This is not Treat Yourself 2017. Sorry.
Thinking sideways.
I don't understand.
Does not compute.
You never know.
Insufficient data to formulate a reply.
What?
Stories of things we simply don't know the answer to.
Well, hey, and welcome again to another episode of Thinking Sideways.
The podcast.
The podcast.
I'm Steve, as always, joined by
Devin.
Joe.
And once again, we get to tackle a mystery.
It's a big on this one.
It is, and once again, it's we do this every now and again. It's time for us to take on a story that's big enough that we've got to take it on as a team.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of our big shows, so be prepared. This one's going to go on for a while because there's a lot of details and intrigue and just kind of unusual things or unexpected things.
Despite what the Wikipedia page will tell you about this mystery. In
fact. Yeah, somebody vandalized the Wikipedia page.
Actually, no, I figured out what the problem was. It was I didn't know how to use Wikipedia.
Okay.
All right.
And one quick note to our listeners before we get into the mystery. This story does acknowledge the existence of sex and some marital decisions that revolve around that. So if the kids are in the room and you're listening and you're not quite sure you want them to hear some of this, you might want to pause this one and listen to it later on your own. The story that we are going to tackle is going to be the unsolved deaths of Dr. Gilbert Bogle and Mrs. Margaret Chandler. And they're two people who died for unknown reasons in Australia sometime in the early hours of New Year's Day, 1963.
Well, at 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. respectively, but okay.
It wasn't that far apart, was it?
Yeah. Let's, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Thanks for killing the mystery.
Sorry.
Before we begin, I do have to send out a huge thank you to Alina, who sent this story to us and then pointed us to a ton of resources.
Yeah.
Kind of made this one happen for us, to be quite honest.
She definitely
all
pushed
footwork.
us, yeah.
Yeah, so it was, again, thank you. Let's begin with the story.
Yeah.
On New Year's Day, 1963, somewhere around 9 a.m., two teenage boys were walking along a path that runs along the Lane Cove River in Sydney, Australia. They came upon a man. He was laying off of the main path, and from the accounts that I've seen, when they first saw him, they figured he was drunk.
Yeah, that's everything. That's the one that I've heard the most.
Yeah, this dude was just laying there. It's New Year's morning.
Of course he's drunk.
Of course he's drunk.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until they came back down that path and saw him still there that they noticed that his face had changed color, and they realized that he was probably dead, and they ran for help.
Yeah, I heard that they said they walked past him, and then a couple hours later they came back, and he literally had not moved at all.
Exactly.
And they thought,
This seems
that's
a little weird.
suspicious.
It's kind of weird, though. I mean, in that 2 hours, nobody else walked by him. I mean,
It's New Year's morning, Joe.
that's true. Everybody's hungover.
Exactly,
Yeah.
or asleep.
I'm suspecting that's what killed these two.
Hangover.
Yeah, the hangover. I've had some killer hangovers, but not that bad. The man was 38-year-old Dr. Bogle, and he was laying face down, half undressed. He wasn't wearing his pants. Mm-hmm. Someone had taken his pants and laid them across his legs and his backside so that from a given distance, it looked like he was wearing pants.
Yeah, and his underwear wasn't there, right? This is a fun fact that I discovered. His underwear was not there, but a pair of ladies' underwear was very close by to him, with silk panties, very close by.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he wore ladies' panties?
No.
No.
Further explained.
Yes, give me just a moment there, Joe.
Ah, okay.
You tease. There was also, just so everybody knows, a square of carpet laid on his back, which was later discovered to have been something that was in his car normally.
Yeah.
When the police arrived, as they will do when someone finds a dead body, they searched the area and they found a second body, which was 28-year-old Margaret Chandler, 45 feet away.
And she had a pair of men's briefs in between her legs. No, that's true. She did.
She did.
Yeah.
So they were panty swappers. Okay.
She, as Devin was kind of getting to, had some strange clothes. She was also partially undressed, but she was in a bit of a depression and had flattened beer boxes laid over her.
Yeah.
Which is an unusual place to be, especially when you're dead. But it's unclear to this day who covered the bodies. Was it one person covered the other, or who did some other person? We don't know that. Well, I think we might get into some of that later on, but just to say on the outset, we don't know how they got covered up.
Yeah.
There were no obvious signs of damage to the body, and by that I mean no obvious trauma. They hadn't been, shot.
They weren't laying in pools of blood.
Exactly. There was some evidence. What's the best way to say this? There was evidence that they had been violently ill before they died. There was vomit and feces both around the bodies and in the area around them. So,
yeah, I read that. It's interesting, actually. I read that there was a small amount of vomit found near Dr. Bogle, like 12 feet away. Or no, 12 inches. I'm sorry, 12 inches, not 12 feet. That's really far away.
that's projectile.
Yeah, so that's interesting that there are also differing accounts of that part of it.
Yeah, and there's some issues with this story because it's
In general.
been rehashed a lot, and we'll talk about some of that. But there was feces everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
that
they
is
were-
an obvious given.
They were
fact.
like all over the place. And I mean, typically when you die, people usually let go. Down
Yeah.
there. But it was more than that. They were actually running around and carpeting the area.
It
with
actually, I
feces.
don't think it was next to their bodies at all. There was some down by the riverbank, and there was some, a couple
was
inches
a bit
away,
of
but
a bit of a trail.
yeah.
Let's put it that way. They marked where they had been.
They left sign.
Regardless, it's not a nice way to go.
No.
But this led the police immediately to suspect that in some way they had been poisoned, but they had no idea how or what with. The official cause of death for both of these individuals was listed as acute circulatory failure, but how or why was never specified. These two particular people who are on a riverbank on New Year's Eve, New Year's morning together,
In various states of undress.
in various states of undress, were married to different people. She was married to a man by the name of Jeffrey Chandler. His wife, Dr. Bogle's wife, was named Vivian Bogle. And I hope I'm saying, I believe it's Bogle is how you pronounce it.
I would think so.
We're going to say it the whole
We're
way.
going to just keep running
We're
that
gonna
way.
go
So
with Bogle.
hope it's not wrong.
Because otherwise we're going to look silly.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Bogley.
Yeah.
No,
But regardless, it's pretty obvious that they were there for a midnight encounter as another way to put it.
Really? What's that?
Look it up on the internet, Joe.
Oh, really?
Okay. Let's give a little bit of backstory. Again, this is just kind of the beginning telling of it, and then we'll go into some details. Both of these individuals, Dr. Bogle, Miss Chandler, had attended a New Year's Eve party on the night of their deaths, which was hosted by another couple by the name of Ken and Ruth Nash. Dr. Bogle attended the party on his own. His wife stayed home to take care of their 3 children. Mrs. Chandler attended the party with her husband, Jeffrey, though he had left the party around 11:30 that night. One odd fact about the party, and I think this was the Nash's way of trying to mix things up and make it interesting.
Yeah, they were super interesting people, those
Yes,
Nashes.
they were. But you'll see this when you come across this case, especially if you do Google images or image searches in general, is that what they told their guests was that they wanted them to bring a piece of art that they had created themselves to the party to display for everybody to talk about. Dr. Vogel brought a drawing, which it's really kind of strange, and honestly, it's weird. Let's just call it weird.
Super weird.
It's a disembodied hand in one corner and a disembodied foot in the other corner with a woman's face that points in two directions. If you ever seen some of those profile images where it looks like it's a face looking at you and to the side, that's what it is. It's kind of got a modernist feel to it, and it made me think of the art that you'll see. There's a Russian artist by the name of Alexander Rodchenko. Is it Rodchenko?
I think it's Rodchenko.
I really feel bad for all of the art classes I've taken. I suddenly can't remember how to pronounce this guy's name. Regardless, it looks like work from both of those, so it's unusual. I don't know a better way to describe it.
Well, you could describe it by the fact that everybody said that it was created while he was high on LSD.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's true, right?
People have speculated that that's how he made it. And the LSD is relevant to what we're talking about, which is the party, because this story gets covered a lot by the media, the newspapers specifically at the time.
At the time.
It was a huge source of headlines, and they were not afraid to insert and exaggerate and come up with theories and just proffer them to postulate that they were the actual thing. One of the, I should say, is that the party was some kind of LSD-fueled orgy.
Yeah.
Which I find a little hard to believe.
Yeah. It's a bit absurd. And from everything that I've read, not actually what was going on.
Yeah, it was kind of a lame party.
It really was.
From what I've heard, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, next time tell them to bring booze instead of paintings.
Well, I remember there was something about Mr. Nash saying that he didn't give anybody more than 2 drinks the whole night.
He was dispensing, quote unquote, that's the term they used, is he was dispensing the drinks, and he would only give people, according to at least one account that I read, that he would only give people 2 drinks maximum.
What a jerk.
So, a very sober affair. But, well, let's get back to our case in point here, which is these folks. At some point in the night...
These folks being Bogle and Chandler?
Bogle and Chandler, not the Nashes, thank you. They were observed outside in the backyard together, described in, and you'll see this in 2 different ways, either in a close conversation or kissing. Not really sure.
Yeah, actually, that's not the first night they met.
That's very true.
Dr. Bogle and Mrs. Chandler had met at a holiday Christmas barbecue. It's Australia. Remember, it's Australia.
Yes.
So it's summer during Christmas. So they were having a Christmas kind of Hawaiian barbecue, another one of the coworkers of Mr. Chandler and Dr. Bogle. And in fact, it was reported by at least one person, who we'll talk about later, that the couple, Dr. Bogle and Mrs. Chandler, had been seen canoodling perhaps that night even.
Or
as early as
an
Christmas.
Intimate conversation of some
well,
kind. Yeah.
I think it was actually, accusation was in fact that they had been making out. Or maybe like had a little romp in the bushes on that night even.
Nice.
The first night that they met. So that's worth mentioning as well.
It is.
Yeah.
Back to the New Year's Eve party. The witness accounts say that the pair left the party together between 2 to 3 a.m. And the accounts vary a little bit on the time, which isn't surprising. It's the middle of the night.
Yep.
It's important to point out that Jeffrey Chandler, if you remember earlier, I'd said he had left the party. He came back, and because he had gone to a different party to have drinks where he could get more than 2.
Yep.
But he did come back to the party and had a conversation with his wife. And when he found out that Margaret wanted to not get a ride home from him, but from Dr. Bogle, he wasn't really all that worried about it. He didn't care.
The account that I heard was that while Mr. Chandler was gone, Dr. Bogle, I keep wanting to refer to them as their first names.
Which is, we can do that.
They called Dr. Bogle Gibb.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And her name was Margaret. So Gibb had offered to give Margaret a ride home because she didn't really know where her husband had gone off to. And apparently when Mr. Chandler, Jeffrey, came back, he said, "Oh, are you ready to go, Margaret?" And she made no move to go. And she was sitting right next to Gibb. And so Jeffrey looked at Gibb and said, "So will you take Margaret home?" And Gibb just kind of looked at him and squinted his eyes for a second and then said, "Right." And then Jeffrey left. Like that was how that happened. Which is just it's so weird.
And we're gonna get into some of this stuff about what the background on these folks,
the proclivities of these people.
But the point is, he left the party and he went about his way.
He wasn't concerned that
Not
Gibb
at all.
was going to give Margaret a ride home.
Yeah.
And more than that.
Wow.
This case itself was the biggest case to date for Sydney. And the police immediately went to work on it. They were reviewing all the evidence. They were trying to hunt down any bit of any lead, any bit of information that might possibly tell them what was going on. A lot of man hours were spent on this case.
Yeah.
Like we talked about before, the newspapers, they went crazy.
Yeah.
And they polluted this story.
Yeah.
Badly. I don't know if either of you did this. I read some of the old newspapers.
Oh, yeah,
you
I
can
did.
find them online.
Yeah, I have a favorite website about this case, and it references at every point what the media was saying, which is very helpful.
And very bad, because they
totally
just
different.
misconstrue a lot of things.
Yeah.
It really hasn't changed either. They're just about as bad today.
No, and we've had this conversation before,
Yeah.
but let's go ahead and first off, let's talk about our three main players in this story.
Yeah.
Okay, my turn. I'm going to talk about Dr. Bogle.
No.
Dr. Bogle. So he's a major player in the mystery, though he doesn't actually say very much. His full name was Gilbert Stanley Bogle. He was born in New Zealand in January 5th, 1924. He studied physics in Britain under a Rhodes Scholarship. He met and married, actually I don't know if he met her in 1950, but he married Vivian in 1950. They had 3 children and also a 4th after his death. And by all accounts, he was a good family man, except for his philandering, which apparently he did a lot of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess you can't really give him 100% marks on that one. But friends
He was a good time, Charlie.
Yeah, but friends said that he was interesting, wickedly smart, fun, well-rounded, into a whole lot of different activities, and
Just kind of an awesome guy.
yeah, people thought he was pretty cool. So he moved back to New Zealand in 1952 with his family and got a university job teaching and researching in physics, which was his field. And then in 1956, he took a job in Australia with the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, which I'm going to call Cicero from now on.
The CSIRO, because
Yeah,
we're going to
so
talk
Cicero.
about that a number of times.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
much easier to do.
Yeah, Cicero is Australia's national science agency, and so they actually cover a lot of different fields of science. He got a 3-year appointment, which began September 56. He started working in the cryogenics group. By about a year later, he had been given an indefinite appointment because apparently his chief of his division liked him so much, found him noteworthy. Here's a quote: "He was noteworthy for his mental powers, his breadth of knowledge, his capacity for original ideas, his drive and enthusiasm, his range of experimental techniques, and his outstanding ability as a lecturer." Yeah, so this guy really liked Bogle.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did. His name was Briggs, and he encouraged Bogle to resume his research on paramagnetic resonance, which I'm not really sure what that is, and I was too lazy to look it up.
It's using radio waves and magnets as weapons.
Is that the maser?
Oh, maybe.
Well, there's talk about one point. I think this might.
Oh,
come
the
up
maser,
later.
yes.
The maser.
Yes.
Maybe that's how you generate them. Yeah, masers are like lasers, but with microwaves.
Yeah.
Coherent. Yeah, lasers, as you know, is coherent light, right?
I do now.
Yeah, all the little photons are moving in the same direction, whereas the light from the light bulb up there in the ceiling, they're just like, shotgun scattering everywhere. But lasers, they're coherent light, and they all move in the same direction.
So, it's. I guess the point of the whole thing is that Dr. Bogle was working on what could be considered, or was encouraged to work on what could be considered weapons of warfare and death rays and weird mad scientist stuff.
That's freaking cool.
Yeah.
I want Grant to be a mad scientist.
Right?
Actually, I checked, and in an alternate timeline, he actually didn't die, and he invented the warp drive in 1977.
Yeah, and then came back to tell us about it.
I know.
Stop it. You're
Listen.
totally making stuff up again. Joe's already wanting to get off script.
Yeah. Briggs, his chief, recommended him for accelerated advancement. He drew attention to the fact that he'd done all this work on the recent development of the maser, which is like a laser, like I said. And his theoretical and practical contribution to the development of this, and apparently was developed for use in radio astronomy, was apparently pretty large. Bogle was a smart guy, actually. I got to say, it's too bad he died. Because
He was a crazy smart guy.
Oh yeah, he was a really smart guy. So his chief in 1962 called him, quote, the most brilliant member of the staff. Well, wow, he must have been off the charts smart. Bogle was offered a 2-year appointment in quantum electronics at Bell Laboratories in the U.S. And he really wanted to take the job. Cicero granted him a leave of absence to take the job. And apparently people said he was very excited about going to work in America at Bell Labs.
In fact, that was one of the reasons that the Nashes had thrown that party. If I remember correctly, it was that or the barbecue party. One of them was part holiday party, part going away party for Dr. Bogle.
You're right. I can't remember which
He
one
was
is
set
which.
to leave within, I think, the month. I think maybe even within a couple weeks. So.
Yeah, it was not far. It was not far away.
Yeah. But it is really kind of sad this guy died because who knows what he would have accomplished.
Yeah. So you want to talk about Miss Chandler, Margaret, for a minute?
Yeah, let's talk about Margaret.
Oh, wait a minute. I got to talk about his hobbies and his turn-ons.
No, this isn't a dating site. Mrs. Chandler, Margaret Chandler, she was 28 years old at the time of her death, and there's not a whole lot out there on Mrs. Chandler. I'll be honest with you, I don't get the impression that she was a particularly interesting human being. I just don't have that impression.
I think guys were interested in her.
I think she was kind of...
She didn't have a whole lot of external pursuits, but I think that what you also need to keep in mind is that she had 2 small kids at the time.
Yeah, she did. She and Mr. Chandler had 2 small children. They were aged 2 and 18 months, and they had left them with her mother and father-in-law that night. She and her husband shared a love of vintage cars and dachshund dogs. Like, how boring. Come on, guys.
The weird thing is, okay, I don't mean to interrupt you here, but the weird thing about that is she liked vintage cars and dachshunds. Maybe that's because her husband really liked both of those things, and so she went along with it. So there's all these pictures of her in vintage cars because he's like, honey, get in there, let me take your picture. And honey, hold my cute dog, and I'll take your picture.
Yeah, it does seem that she was the kind of person that didn't have a whole lot of going on for herself. She seemed to have been at least moderately intelligent. I think she probably was likely quite intelligent. She just kind of seemed boring. Like, she just kind of adopted everybody else's stuff. She seemed to be pretty reserved.
She'd go with the flow.
Yeah, they talk about how
his wife.
Mr. Chandler?
Oh, was he? He was not a doctor?
No.
He was a
No.
doctor? Oh, okay.
Vogel was a doctor. Chandler was not.
I do have the sense he was kind of an interesting guy too. I don't know necessarily what attracted him to Mrs. Chandler. I don't know if it was just that it was convenient. Maybe he knocked her up and they got married. I don't know.
Maybe.
I
mean, it's
can't
hard to say.
remember what the circumstances were,
Yeah.
but it was just he. Well, let's talk about Jeffrey.
Sure,
Chandler.
yeah. Oh, just as a fun little side note, you know how everybody knows like 20 Jessicas?
Yeah.
There were 5 Margarets at the New Year's party that they attended at Ken and Ruth Nash's house.
You know,
There were 5 different Margarets.
And I
there.
bet there were only like 7 people there because they only served 2 drinks.
Yeah, yeah, there were like 20 people there.
I'm
5
surprised
of
there was
them were
that many.
Margaret. Yeah.
Oh, well, let's talk about Jeffrey Chandler. Jeffrey Chandler also worked at the CSIRO, or Cicero, as
Cicero.
Joe was putting it, which I'm going to keep using.
Yeah, it's
But
nice.
he worked there as a research scientist, and he actually did work in the same building as Dr. Bogle. The two were work compatriots. They had worked together, not only just seen each other in the building before, but evidently they had worked together on at least one experiment. I believe it was only one experiment, but never really hung out in the same social circles. Because Jeffrey, he hung out in a very specific sect.
Yes.
Yeah, he did.
He did.
Huh?
But let's keep going here.
Bunch of freaks.
Jeffrey Chandler was, of course, as we said earlier, an immediate suspect, and of course the press and the police went after him really hard. And
But, actually, in cases like this, let's see, the first guy I'd probably
of
take
course,
a look
yeah,
at.
the husband is always the first one that's going to get
Oh, yeah.
attacked. I mean, this is standard protocol. I'm not knocking anyone for this.
Well, I'm not. I would knock the press. They have a duty not to slander people. The press had a duty
I'm
to look
leaving
into
that
this guy.
aside. They went after his lifestyles, his beliefs, and in the end, his desire to avoid the press didn't help him out at all.
Yeah.
These are some of the things that don't help him. Jeffrey was a member of the Communist Party.
Yep.
Which got him a little bit of bad press. He also, as it turned out, had been working for the ASIO, which is the Australian Security Intelligence Organization. I never got a clear bead on this, but from what I understand, what he was doing is the ASIO was trying to get him to provide information on the Communist Party. One of the things he did is he tried to host meetings at places, and he would try to bug the place for them. He bungled this badly, so he tried to do this.
Is it possible that Mr. Chandler was not actually a sincere communist and that he just basically infiltrated the organization?
I don't believe so. I think that he agreed with things that were in the party, from what I understand, but there's a bad thing about that, and the problem is that he went ahead and signed up with the Communist Party. At that time, it was a bad thing, and to be a government employee, you could not be affiliated with that party at all.
Well,
You couldn't have any ties.
If you're potentially, I'm not sure. I'm sure at least some of Cicero's projects were classified.
Of course, yeah.
And so, definitely, there's good reason for that.
Yes, there is, but he while he might have been a member, he wasn't a book thumping, card carrying, scream at the masses member. He just kind of liked their ideals, I think. But the problem is that the ASIO, they, from what I've read, came at him and said, "Listen, you work for us, or we're breaking the news and you're losing your job. And by the way, once you get blackballed from this job, you're never working in this country again."
Yeah.
So of course he went along with them.
Good idea.
Yeah. Oh, and I briefly mentioned there in the list of things that people went kind of crazy about for him one of them was his lifestyle.
Yeah.
Because he was kind of a swinger.
He totally was a swinger. He believed in sleeping with multiple women, and he did so as